In the quiet mists of ancient history, long before Japan would birth its legendary shadow warriors, there existed a different kind of soldier. Not one who marched in formation or bore gleaming armor into sunlit battlefields, but one who moved through darkness, unseen and unheard. This warrior fought not with strength, but with information. Not with honor, but with deception. And it was in the courts and battlefields of ancient China more than 2,000 years ago that the seeds of what would become ninjutsu were first planted in the fertile soil of human conflict. Picture, if you will, the China of 500 BC. The Warring States period had engulfed the land in endless conflict, and among the countless generals and strategists seeking advantage, one man understood a truth that others had overlooked. His name was Sun Tzu, and in his masterwork, The Art of War, he dedicated an entire chapter to something he called Yongjian, the use of spies. All warfare is based on deception, he wrote, and in those words lay the philosophical foundation for every shadow warrior who would follow. Sun Tzu categorized 5 types of spies, each with their own deadly purpose. There were local spies who lived among the enemy and gathered whispers. Inward spies who were enemy officials turned to betrayal. Converted spies, enemy agents captured and turned back against their masters. Doomed spies who carried false information and were meant to be caught and killed. And finally, surviving spies who penetrated deep into enemy territory and returned with intelligence that could topple empires. These were not merely soldiers who gathered information, they were artists of invisibility, masters of lies, practitioners of a warfare so subtle that battles could be won before they ever began. The techniques described in these ancient texts were revolutionary. Agents would disguise themselves as merchants, monks, or wandering performers. They learned to read the subtlest signs, a poorly guarded gate, a general's drinking habits, the location of supply routes. They mastered codes and secret messages, hiding intelligence in seemingly innocent objects or encoded in poems and songs. They understood that a whispered rumor could be as deadly as 1,000 swords, that destroying an enemy's will to fight was superior to destroying his army. But China's gift to the shadow arts extended beyond mere theory. As centuries passed, these techniques evolved and spread. Korean kingdoms, sitting between the great powers of China and Japan, absorbed these methods and adapted them to their own needs. Traders, diplomats, and refugees carried stories of these invisible warriors across the narrow straits to the Japanese archipelago. By the 6th and 7th centuries AD, as Buddhism and Chinese culture flooded into Japan, so too came whispers of unconventional warfare, of victory achieved through cunning rather than courage. Japan, in those early centuries, was a land of competing clans and shifting alliances. The samurai class had not yet crystallized into the honor-bound warriors of legend. Warfare was brutal, chaotic, and pragmatic. When Chinese military treatises arrived in the hands of Japanese generals, they found eager students. The concept of espionage, of using shadows to defeat sunlight, resonated in a culture that already understood the power of subtlety and indirection. Yet something remarkable happened in the translation from Chinese theory to Japanese practice. The Japanese did not merely copy what they learned, they transformed it. They took Sun Tzu's intellectual framework and married it to their own native traditions. Mountain ascetics called Yamabushi, who practiced extreme spiritual and physical disciplines in Japan's remote peaks, began to blend their mystical practices with these imported techniques of stealth and survival. Monks versed in esoteric Buddhism brought meditation and mental discipline to the art of espionage. Warriors frustrated by the limitations of conventional combat saw in these methods a path to power that transcended mere strength. The mountains of central Japan, particularly the regions that would become Aiga and Koga provinces, proved ideal for these developments. Remote, shrouded in mist, accessible only through narrow passes, These areas became refuges for those who wished to practice arts that polite society considered dishonorable. Here, away from the great courts and established powers, families began to pass down knowledge that was part Chinese military theory, part Japanese mountain mysticism, and part pure innovation born of necessity. By the 15th century, as Japan descended into the chaos of the Sengoku period, these scattered practices would coalesce into something new and terrible. The shinobi no mono, those who endure and conceal, would emerge from the shadows not as imitators of Chinese spies, but as something uniquely Japanese. Something deadlier. Something that would haunt the nightmares of samurai and shoguns for centuries to come. But that transformation lay in the future. For now, in these early centuries, the seeds were merely germinating. Chinese wisdom, Korean adaptation, Japanese innovation, all flowing together like streams merging into a dark river, a river that would one day drown empires in silence. There are moments in history when the old order crumbles, when the rules that once governed human conduct dissolve into nothing, and when survival demands the abandonment of every cherished principle. For Japan, that moment arrived with terrible finality in the year 1467, when a dispute over succession to the shogunate ignited a conflict that would consume the nation for nearly 150 years. They called it the Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states, and it was an era when honor became a luxury that few could afford, and darkness itself became a weapon. Before this catastrophic period, Japanese warfare had followed certain patterns, certain expectations. Samurai warriors, bound by the code of Bushido, fought with a peculiar blend of brutality and ceremony. Battles began with formal declarations, with champions stepping forward to announce their lineage and accomplishments before engaging in single combat. There was a choreography to violence, a structure that made war comprehensible, almost ritual. Even in defeat, a warrior could find meaning through the proper death. Through seppuku, performed with dignity before witnesses who would record one's final poem. But the Onin War shattered these comfortable illusions. What began as a succession dispute in Kyoto metastasized into nationwide chaos. The shogun's authority evaporated like morning mist. Provincial lords, the daimyo, found themselves suddenly free from central control, and with that freedom came a terrible question. How does one survive when everyone is an enemy? When alliances shift like sand, when today's ally becomes tomorrow's assassin? Traditional samurai warfare proved woefully inadequate for this new reality. The formal challenge, the announced attack, the honorable confrontation, these were beautiful concepts, but they got you killed. A daimyo who insisted on fighting fairly would soon find his castle infiltrated, his supplies poisoned, his allies turned against him through whispered lies. The Sengoku period rewarded cunning over courage, deception over honor, survival over glory, and so, gradually, reluctantly, the great lords of Japan began to seek out those who had mastered the arts of shadow. Mountain villages in Iga and Koga, which had long practiced unconventional warfare in obscurity, suddenly found their services in desperate demand. These were not samurai, they belonged to no noble class, followed no elaborate code of honor. They were farmers, monks, outcasts, and mystics who had discovered that invisibility was its own kind of power. That information could kill as surely as any sword. The term shinobi no mono began to appear in military records and whispered conversations. It meant, roughly, one who endures and conceals, though no simple translation could capture the full weight of what these individuals represented. They were warriors who had rejected every principle that made a samurai recognizable as such. They wore no distinctive armor, announced no lineage, sought no glory. They killed without warning, disappeared without trace, and felt no shame in methods that would have horrified traditional warriors. What made the shinobi invaluable was their willingness to do what samurai could not or would not do. A samurai might balk at disguising himself as a peasant. It violated the rigid class distinctions that gave his life meaning. A shinobi would become a peasant so completely that even his own mother might pass him unrecognized. A samurai would consider poison a coward's weapon, dishonorable and beneath contempt. A shinobi understood that a dead enemy was a dead enemy, and the method mattered far less than the result. The chaos of the Sengoku period created a perverse kind of natural selection. Daimyo who refused to employ shinobi, who clung to outdated notions of honorable warfare, found themselves outmaneuvered and destroyed. Those who embraced these shadow warriors, who sent them to infiltrate enemy castles, to gather intelligence on troop movements, to assassinate rival generals in their sleep. These were the lords who survived and prospered. Morality became a luxury purchased with victory. Consider the transformation this represented. For centuries, Japanese warfare had been the domain of an elite warrior class that prided itself on transparency, on the public display of martial virtue. Now success belonged to those who could move unseen, who could strike from darkness, who could manipulate reality itself through lies and misdirection. The very foundations of Japanese military culture were crumbling, and from the rubble emerged something new and terrifying. By the late 15th century, the shinobi had evolved from scattered practitioners of unconventional tactics into organized networks of highly trained specialists. Villages in Iga and Koga began to formalize their training methods, to pass down techniques through family lineages, to develop systematic approaches to espionage, assassination, and psychological warfare. What had been improvisation became doctrine. What had been desperation became art. Yet even as these shadow warriors grew in capability and reputation, they remained fundamentally outside the social order. Samurai might employ them, pay them, rely upon them for survival, but they never fully accepted them. The shinobi existed in a twilight realm between necessity and disgrace, between invaluable asset and contaminating presence. They were the dark secret that everyone knew, but no one acknowledged. The unspoken answer to impossible problems. The Sengoku period would eventually end, brought to a close by the unifying efforts of Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and finally Tokugawa Ieyasu. But the shadow warriors born in its chaos would not so easily disappear. They had proven their worth too thoroughly, had become too deeply embedded in the machinery of power. Japan had learned a lesson it could never unlearn, that sometimes, to survive, one must embrace the darkness, and in the mountains of Iga and Koga, in villages shrouded by mist and secrecy, the shinobi continued their training, perfecting arts that would make them legends. The age of chaos had given them birth. What they would become in the centuries that followed would surpass even the darkest imaginings of those who first summoned them from the shadows. There are certain places on Earth that seem designed by nature itself for secrecy. Regions where the very landscape conspires to hide what lies within, where mist and mountain create a barrier more formidable than any castle wall. In the heart of medieval Japan, two such places existed, lying only 30 miles apart, yet separated by some of the most treacherous terrain in the nation. These were the provinces of Iga and Koga, and within their hidden valleys, among their shrouded peaks, the art of ninjutsu would reach its terrible perfection. Geography is destiny, and nowhere was this truer than in these remote regions of central Honshu. Iga Province, modern-day Mie Prefecture, sat nestled in a basin surrounded by mountains on all sides. To reach it, one had to traverse narrow passes that could be easily defended, winding paths where a handful of determined fighters could hold off an army. The land itself was a fortress, accessible only to those who knew its secrets. Dense forests of cedar and cypress covered the slopes, their darkness impenetrable even at midday. Rivers rushed through deep gorges, their courses known only to locals. And always, perpetually, there was the mist, thick, clinging fog that could reduce visibility to mere feet, that transformed familiar paths into bewildering mazes. Koga Province, now part of Shiga Prefecture, possessed similar advantages. Situated near Lake Biwa, Japan's largest freshwater lake, it too was surrounded by mountains and forests. The villages here were small, scattered, connected by paths that strangers could never hope to navigate without guidance. Between Aiga and Koga stretched the Suzuka mountain range, its peaks reaching toward the heavens, its valleys dark and mysterious. These were lands where the old gods still held sway, where mountain spirits were said to walk, where Buddhist monks practiced extreme asceticism in caves and under waterfalls. This isolation was not accidental, but cultivated, even cherished. As central authority collapsed during the Sengoku period, Iga and Koga became essentially autonomous regions, governed not by appointed lords but by councils of local families. These were not peasant villages in the traditional sense, but organized communities of warrior farmers who had rejected, or been rejected by, the rigid class structure that defined the rest of Japan. Here, a man's worth was measured not by his birth, but by his skills, not by his name, but by his results. The families of Iga and Koga were bound together by blood, marriage and shared knowledge passed down through generations. In Aiga, the dominant clans included the Hattori, Momochi, and Fujibayashi families, names that would become legendary in the annals of ninjutsu. Each family specialized in different aspects of the shadow arts. The Hattori were known for their mastery of strategy and leadership. The Momochi excelled in espionage and disguise. The Fujibayashi documented techniques and trained new generations. Together they formed an interlocking network of expertise, each family contributing to a collective wisdom that no single lineage could possess alone. Koga's organization differed slightly, but was no less formidable. Here, 53 families formed a confederation known as the Koga-ryu, united in mutual defense and shared purpose. The Mochizuki, Koga, Naiki, Akutagawa, and Ukai families were among the most prominent. Where Aiga's clans sometimes competed and feuded, Koga's families maintained a more unified front, perhaps because their proximity to more powerful neighbors demanded greater cooperation. Yet, despite their closeness, one could almost see from Aiga to Koga on a clear day these two regions maintained a complex relationship that oscillated between rivalry and alliance. Sometimes they competed for contracts with the same daimyo, each claiming superiority in the shadow arts. Other times, when faced with external threats, they would unite with devastating effect. This dynamic tension pushed both regions to constant innovation, to the refinement and expansion of their deadly knowledge. The villages themselves were deceptively ordinary in appearance. Thatched roof houses clustered around central squares. Rice paddies stretched across valley floors. To an outsider, these might seem like any other rural communities in feudal Japan. But beneath this mundane surface lay remarkable secrets. Homes had hidden compartments and escape tunnels. Seemingly innocent farm tools could transform into weapons. The elderly woman working in her garden might be a master of poison. The humble carpenter could scale sheer walls and pick any lock ever made. Training began in childhood, woven seamlessly into daily life. Children played games that developed balance, stealth, and spatial awareness. They learned to move silently through forests by observing animals. They memorized local geography so thoroughly that they could navigate blindfolded. Physical conditioning happened naturally through the demands of mountain farming, climbing slopes, carrying heavy loads, working from dawn to dusk. But alongside these practical skills came something deeper, philosophy, meditation, the cultivation of a mind that could endure any hardship and betray no emotion. The religious culture of these regions was syncretic, blending Buddhism, Shinto, and Taoist elements with the mountain mysticism of the Yamabushi ascetics. Shrines dotted the mountainsides, places where practitioners could meditate and train in isolation. The concept of nintai, endurance, perseverance, patience, became almost sacred. A true shinobi must endure the unendurable, must wait days without moving, must suppress every natural human impulse in service of the mission. What made Iga and Koga truly unique was the systematization of knowledge. While other regions might have individual spies or assassins, here entire communities devoted themselves to perfecting these arts. Techniques were documented in scrolls, passed from master to student, refined through actual practice. Failures were analyzed, successes replicated. Over generations, this created a body of knowledge, ninjutsu, that was comprehensive, sophisticated, and utterly lethal. The rivalry between Iga and Koga served a crucial purpose. It prevented stagnation. Each region knew that the other was constantly developing new techniques, new weapons, new strategies. To fall behind was to risk irrelevance, or worse, to become vulnerable to each other. This competition without open warfare, most of the time, created a perfect environment for rapid evolution of the shadow arts. Yet for all their power and knowledge, the people of Iga and Koga lived with profound insecurity. They possessed no great castles, commanded no large armies, controlled no wealthy trade routes. Their only capital was information, their only currency was skill. They lived always on the edge of annihilation, knowing that any sufficiently determined enemy could potentially overwhelm their natural defenses. This existential vulnerability kept them sharp, focused, and perpetually innovative. As the 16th century progressed, and the chaos of the Sengoku period intensified, these remote mountain provinces would find themselves drawn ever deeper into the conflicts that consumed Japan. The great unifiers, Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, Ieyasu, would all encounter the shadow warriors of Iga and Koga. Some would employ them, others would attempt to destroy them. But none would emerge unchanged from the encounter. In these hidden valleys, among these mist-shrouded peaks, something had been born that Japan had never seen before, a culture entirely devoted to the perfection of invisible warfare, where every man, woman, and child was a potential warrior, where the line between farmer and assassin dissolved into shadow. The world would come to know them as ninja, though they called themselves simply shinobi, and the legends that would grow around them, however exaggerated, would rest on a foundation of very real and very deadly truth. In the villages of Iga and Koga, childhood was not a time of innocence, but a crucible of transformation. From the moment a child drew breath in these mountain communities, their destiny began to take shape, not through choice, but through the inexorable logic of survival. To be born in these places was to be born into shadow, and the process by which ordinary infants became extraordinary warriors represented perhaps the most systematic and unforgiving training regimen ever devised by human civilization. Selection began before consciousness itself. Families watched their newborns with calculating eyes, searching for signs that might indicate future potential. Did the infant startle easily at sudden sounds, or did they remain calm? How quickly did they adapt to discomfort? Were their movements coordinated or clumsy? These observations, subtle and continuous, formed the first layer of assessment. Some children, it was believed, were simply born with the temperament necessary for shinobi work, a certain detachment, an unusual ability to focus, a natural inclination toward stealth and observation. But temperament alone was never enough. By the age of 3 or 4, when most children in feudal Japan were just beginning to understand the world around them, the children of ninja families were already being shaped by deliberate intervention. It started innocuously enough, games that were not quite games. Hide and seek became an exercise in remaining absolutely motionless for hours, controlling breath and heartbeat until discovery seemed impossible. Tag transformed into lessons in evasion and pursuit, teaching children to move through space with maximum efficiency and minimum sound. By age 5, the training intensified in ways that would horrify modern sensibilities. Children were taken into the forests before dawn and instructed to find their way home before nightfall with nothing but their wits and the skills they'd absorbed through observation. They learned to identify edible plants and poisonous ones, to find water in seemingly barren terrain, to read the weather from the behavior of animals and the quality of light. Failure meant going hungry, being lost in darkness, facing fears that would break adult minds. Success meant survival, and the gradual accumulation of confidence that no environment was truly hostile to one who understood it. Physical conditioning began early and never relented. Children learned to walk on rice paper without tearing it, developing footwork so delicate that they could cross a room of sleeping people without disturbing a single dreamer. They practiced hanging from tree branches until their grip strength became superhuman, until they could support their entire body weight with just their fingertips for minutes at a time. They ran up and down mountain paths carrying progressively heavier loads, building endurance that would later allow them to travel 50 miles in a single night while carrying full equipment. Acrobatics were not taught as performance, but as survival skills. Children learned to fall from heights without injury, to roll and absorb impact, to move through spaces that seemed impossibly small. They practiced jumping from standing positions to moving starts, across gaps that would make adults hesitate. They learned to climb anything, trees, walls, cliffs, using tools or using nothing but their bare hands and feet. The human body, they were taught, has no real limitations except those imposed by fear and ignorance. Water training was particularly rigorous. Children were submerged in cold streams and taught to control their breathing, to slow their heart rates, to remain underwater for lengths of time that defied normal human capacity. They learned to swim silently without splashing, moving through water like fish rather than like struggling mammals. They practiced breathing through hollow reeds, a technique that would later allow them to hide, submerged in moats and rivers, while enemy soldiers passed overhead. But perhaps the most crucial aspect of early training was psychological. From the earliest age, children were taught to observe without being observed, to notice everything while appearing to notice nothing. They learned to read human behavior, these subtle tells that indicated lying, fear, aggression, attraction. They studied faces until they could identify individuals from posture alone, from gait, from the smallest distinctive mannerisms. They learned to mimic these behaviors, to become mirrors that reflected whatever role circumstances demanded. Emotional control was cultivated through methods that seem almost cruel in retrospect. Children were exposed to frightening situations repeatedly until fear itself became boring, routine, meaningless. They witnessed death of animals first, then eventually of humans, until the sight of blood and mortality provoked nothing but clinical detachment. They were taught that emotions were vulnerabilities, levers that enemies could use to manipulate and destroy. Love, anger, fear, joy, all were potential weaknesses that a true shinobi must transcend. The process of training also involved active suppression of individual identity. Children were discouraged from standing out, from seeking recognition or praise. The goal was not to be the best, but to be invisible, to blend perfectly with whatever environment or role they inhabited. Success meant that no one remembered you, that you left no impression except the one you deliberately chose to create. This death of ego, begun in childhood, was perhaps the most difficult lesson of all. Family bonds were simultaneously strengthened and complicated by this training. Parents loved their children but also understood that sentimentality could kill. A child who knew their parents would ransom them if captured was a child with a fatal vulnerability. So families maintained emotional distance even while teaching essential skills, creating relationships that were simultaneously intimate and strangely cold. The family unit became a training cell, and every member was both teacher and student, guard and potential weakness. By the time these children reached adolescence, they had been transformed into something fundamentally different from ordinary humans. Their bodies were capable of feats that seemed supernatural. Their minds processed information with computer-like efficiency. Their emotions were controlled, channeled, weaponized. They could endure pain that would drive normal people mad, hunger that would kill ordinary children, fear that would paralyze trained soldiers. Yet something essential was lost in this transformation. These children had never experienced the careless joy of ordinary childhood, the freedom to make mistakes without life-threatening consequences, the luxury of vulnerability. They had been hardened into weapons, and like all weapons, they were defined entirely by their function. The question of what it meant to be human, separate from what it meant to be useful, was one they were trained never to ask. The villages of Iga and Koga produced generation after generation of these shadow warriors, each cohort refined by the lessons learned from predecessors. The training methods evolved, became more sophisticated, more psychologically nuanced. But the fundamental principle remained constant: to create human beings who could operate effectively in any environment, under any conditions, without the normal limitations of fear, morality, or self-preservation instinct. This was the foundation upon which all else rested. Before a shinobi could master the 18 disciplines, before they could learn philosophy or strategy, they had to be remade at the most fundamental level. They had to become creatures of shadow, uncomfortable in darkness, at home in situations that would destroy ordinary people. They had to embrace a kind of death, the death of normal human existence, in order to live as something else entirely. And so childhood in these mountain villages was both blessing and curse, gift and theft. The children who survived, and not all did, emerged with capabilities that bordered on the superhuman. But they also emerged with scars invisible to the eye, with absences where normal human experiences should have been. They were the most capable warriors their age had ever seen, but the price of that capability was paid in coin that could never be recovered, the simple, irreplaceable treasure of an ordinary life. There exists in the history of martial arts a concept so comprehensive, so meticulously developed, that it represents not merely a fighting system, but an entire philosophy of human capability. The Japanese called it Ninpo Juhake, the 18 disciplines of ninjutsu, and within this framework lay everything a shadow warrior might need to survive and succeed in a world of endless danger. To master these 18 skills was to become something more than human, a being capable of adapting to any situation, overcoming any obstacle, defeating any enemy through means conventional warriors could not even imagine. The first discipline was taijutsu, unarmed combat, but not as samurai understood it. Where traditional martial arts emphasized strength and direct confrontation, ninja taijutsu focused on evasion, redirection, and targeting vulnerabilities. A shinobi learned to use an opponent's force against them, to strike nerve clusters that could paralyze with minimal effort, to move in ways that made them difficult to hit or grab. The body itself became a weapon, every joint a potential tool for inflicting pain or creating escape. Training involved thousands of repetitions until movement became instinctive, faster than conscious thought. Kenjutsu, the art of the sword, was the second discipline, though the ninja approach differed radically from samurai swordsmanship. The ninja sword, was shorter, straighter, and more utilitarian than the elegant katana. Its scabbard could be used as a breathing tube, a step for climbing, or a club. The sword itself was a tool as much as a weapon, designed for pragmatic efficiency rather than aesthetic beauty. Ninja learned to draw and strike in a single motion, to fight in confined spaces where longer swords would be useless, to use the blade in ways that would horrify traditionalists but kept the wielder alive. The third discipline, Sojutsu, covered spear and staff fighting. Ninja favored weapons that could serve multiple purposes: a walking staff that concealed a blade, a farming implement that transformed into a lethal weapon. They learned to use reach advantage, to keep enemies at a distance while striking from angles that conventional spear techniques never explored. The versatility was crucial. A shinobi might need to fight as a peasant with a bamboo pole one day, and as a soldier with a proper yari the next. Shuriken jutsu, the art of throwing blades, was perhaps the most iconic ninja skill. Shuriken came in dozens of forms: star-shaped, spike-shaped, needle-like. Each design served different purposes. Some were meant to distract or wound rather than kill. Others carried poison. The training required to accurately throw these weapons in darkness, in rain, while moving from awkward positions was immense. Masters could pin a butterfly to a tree trunk at 20 paces, could throw multiple projectiles simultaneously to strike several targets. But the real value wasn't lethality, it was creating opportunities for escape or further attack. The fifth discipline, Kusarigama Jutsu, involved the chain and sickle weapon, a farming tool transformed into an instrument of sophisticated violence. The kusarigama combined cutting blade with weighted chain, allowing attacks from multiple angles and distances. The chain could entangle weapons or limbs, the weight could strike from beyond sword range, and the sickle could finish a disabled opponent. Mastering it required understanding physics, timing, and spatial relationships in 3 dimensions simultaneously. Bujutsu, horsemanship, might seem straightforward, but ninja approached it differently than samurai cavalry. They learned to ride without saddles, to mount and dismount at speed, to use horses for rapid infiltration and escape rather than for battlefield charges. They studied how to quiet horses, to guide them with minimal signals, to select animals suited for stealth operations rather than for impressive appearance. The 7th discipline, Suiren, covered water training in comprehensive detail. Beyond basic swimming, ninja learned to move through water silently, to control breathing for extended underwater concealment, to use rivers and moats as highways for infiltration. They practiced with specialized equipment, water shoes that allowed walking on the surface for short distances, breathing tubes disguised as reeds, waterproof containers for keeping equipment dry. Water, which stopped most soldiers, became the ninja's element. Boryaku, strategy and tactics, formed the 8th discipline, drawing heavily on Chinese military classics but adapted for unconventional warfare. This wasn't just battlefield strategy, but the art of understanding human psychology, exploiting weaknesses, creating situations where victory was achieved before fighting began. Ninja studied politics, economics, human nature, anything that might provide leverage or advantage. The 9th discipline, Choho, dealt specifically with espionage and intelligence gathering. This included techniques for memory enhancement, for extracting information through conversation or interrogation, for creating and maintaining cover identities. Ninja learned mnemonic systems that allowed them to remember vast amounts of information without written records. Crucial when captured documents could mean death. In Tunjutsu, the art of escape and concealment was the 10th discipline and perhaps the most essential for survival. This covered everything from picking locks to creating diversions, from understanding how human perception worked to exploiting its limitations. Ninja learned to become invisible not through magic, but through profound understanding of shadow, light, and human attention. They mastered the art of misdirection, making observers see what the ninja wanted them to see rather than what was actually there. The 11th discipline, Hensojutsu, was the art of disguise and impersonation. This went far beyond wearing costumes. It involved becoming the character so completely that deception became reality. A ninja might spend months studying a particular trade or profession before impersonating a practitioner. They learned to walk differently, to speak in regional dialects, to know the subtle details that made an identity convincing. To experts, shinobi eerie, stealth, and infiltration formed the 12th discipline, combining physical skills with psychological understanding.
How does one enter a guarded compound?
By understanding guard routines, exploiting moment-to-moment lapses in attention, moving during times when humans are naturally less alert, ninja studied architecture to know where structures were weakest, where entries might be forced or created. The 13th discipline, Fukiya, involved the blowgun, a silent, deadly weapon perfect for delivering poisoned darts. The range was limited, but the silence absolute. A skilled practitioner could eliminate a guard from shadow without anyone nearby noticing. The blowgun could also deliver non-lethal loads, irritating powders to create distraction,
or mark darts to track a target's movement. Tenman, meteorology, was the 14th discipline,
teaching ninja to read weather signs, to predict conditions hours or days in advance. This wasn't mere superstition, but careful observation accumulated over generations. Knowing when fog would roll in, when rain would begin, when clouds would hide the moon, this knowledge could mean the difference between success and disaster. The 15th discipline, Chimon, covered geography in exhaustive detail. Ninja memorized terrain, studied maps, understood how to navigate by stars, sun, landmarks. They could estimate distances with uncanny accuracy, could plan routes that avoided observation, could find their way through unfamiliar territory using principles that applied everywhere. Seishinteki Kyoyo, spiritual refinement, formed the 16th discipline, the mental and philosophical training that made everything else possible. Through meditation, breathing exercises, and mental conditioning, ninja learned to control fear, to remain calm under extreme stress, to access mental states that enhanced performance. This discipline drew from multiple religious and philosophical traditions, synthesized into practical techniques for psychological dominance. The 17th discipline, Kyaku-jutsu, involved gunpowder and explosives, a relatively late addition to the 18 skills. Ninja learned to manufacture black powder, to create smoke bombs for escape, to use small explosive charges for breaching walls or creating diversions. They understood chemistry in practical terms, knowing which substances created which effects. Finally, the 18th discipline was Suisa, the art of manipulating water and fire to create effects that seemed supernatural. This included understanding how to use mirrors to signal or blind, how to create illusions with smoke and light, how to start fires that would spread in predictable patterns. It was showmanship combined with practical knowledge, designed to enhance the psychological impact of ninja operations. Together, these 18 disciplines represented the most comprehensive martial education ever systematized. A master of all 18 was rare. Most ninja specialized in certain areas while maintaining competence in others. But the framework ensured that every shinobi possessed a versatile skill set that made them adaptable to virtually any situation. They were not merely warriors, but engineers, psychologists, athletes, scholars, and artists of deception. The genius of the system lay in its integration. Each discipline supported and enhanced the others. Physical skills were useless without strategy.
Strategy meant nothing without the courage born of spiritual training.
Courage was wasted without the knowledge to apply it effectively. The 18 disciplines were not separate skills but facets of a unified whole, a complete philosophy of survival and achievement through unconventional means. In the darkness of a mountain cave, a figure sits motionless.
Hours pass.
The cold penetrates to the bone, yet the body does not shiver. Hunger gnaws, yet concentration does not waver. This is not mere physical endurance, but something deeper, a state of consciousness that transcends ordinary human limitation. To understand the ninja, one must understand that their greatest weapon was never the sword or shuriken, but the mind that wielded them. And that mind was forged in the crucible of spiritual practices drawn from three great traditions: Buddhism, Taoism, and the esoteric mysticism of Shugendo. The philosophical foundation of ninjutsu was paradoxical, borrowing from religions that explicitly prohibited violence while creating warriors of unparalleled lethality. Yet this contradiction was more apparent than real. What the ninja absorbed from these traditions was not dogma but technique, methods for controlling consciousness, for accessing mental states that enhance performance, for transcending the fear of death that paralyzed ordinary soldiers. From Buddhism came the concept of mushin, no mind or emptiness. This was not the absence of thought, but rather a state where thought flowed without attachment, where the mind responded to circumstances with perfect spontaneity. A ninja in mushin moved without hesitation, acted without second-guessing, adapted to changing situations with fluid grace. There was no inner dialogue questioning decisions, no emotional turbulence clouding judgment. The self, with all its fears and desires, temporarily ceased to exist, leaving only pure awareness and response. The path to mushin required years of meditation practice. Ninja learned zazen, seated meditation, sitting for hours in positions that induced physical discomfort, training the mind to remain centered despite bodily pain. They practiced kinhin, walking meditation, moving with deliberate slowness, bringing total awareness to each step, each breath, each moment. Through these practices, they developed the ability to enter meditative states at will, even in the midst of action. A ninja infiltrating an enemy castle could maintain meditative awareness, noticing everything while remaining psychologically detached from fear or excitement. Taoism contributed equally crucial concepts. The Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu's foundational text, spoke of water as the ultimate metaphor for effective action. Soft, yielding yet capable of wearing away stone, of flowing around any obstacle, of taking any shape required by circumstance. Ninja embraced this philosophy completely. They did not fight force with force, but redirected it, absorbed it, turned it back against aggressors. Like water, they took the path of least resistance, achieved objectives through indirect means, preserved themselves by refusing to be rigid or predictable. The Taoist concept of wu wei, non-action or effortless action, became central to ninja methodology. This did not mean passivity, but rather action so perfectly aligned with circumstances that it required no wasted effort, no struggle against reality. A ninja practicing wu wei would not force a lock, but would understand its mechanism so completely that opening it became natural, inevitable. They would not fight an enemy's strength, but would recognize and exploit the weakness that must exist wherever strength was. Concentrated from Taoism also came sophisticated understanding of qi, the vital energy believed to flow through all living things. While modern science might dispute the literal existence of qi, the practices designed to cultivate and direct it produced undeniable results. Breathing exercises taught ninja to regulate their nervous systems, to slow heart rates at will, to remain active for extended periods without fatigue. They learned to focus attention so completely that pain could be ignored, that cold or heat became irrelevant, that the body's normal limitations seemed to disappear. But perhaps the most distinctive spiritual influence on ninjutsu came from Shugendo, the way of mountain asceticism. This uniquely Japanese tradition blended Buddhism with native Shinto beliefs and Taoist practices, creating something entirely new. The Yamabushi mountain priests practiced extreme austerities, standing under freezing waterfalls for hours, fasting for days while traversing mountain ranges, hanging from cliffs by their fingertips while reciting sutras. These practices were designed to break down the normal boundaries of human endurance, to access states of consciousness unavailable through ordinary experience. Many ninja were trained by Yamabushi or adopted their practices. They learned to withstand environmental extremes, to function effectively despite hunger, cold, pain, or exhaustion. But more importantly, they learned something about the nature of limitation itself, that most human boundaries are psychological rather than physical, that perceived impossibilities often dissolve when confronted with proper intention and technique. The Kujikiri 9 symbolic cuts represented
one of the most distinctive
practices ninja adopted from esoteric Buddhism. This involved forming hand seals, mudra, while reciting 9 syllables of power, a ritual believed to invoke protection, enhance abilities, and focus intention. To modern eyes, this might seem like superstition, but its psychological effects were real and powerful. The ritual served as a form of self-hypnosis, a way of programming the unconscious mind for peak performance. A ninja performing Kujikiri before a mission entered a heightened state of awareness and confidence, effectively conducting a pre-operation psychological preparation that modern special forces would recognize and respect. The 9 syllables, Rin, Pyo To Sha Kai Jin Retsu Zai, Zen, were each associated with different qualities: strength, energy, harmony, healing, intuition, awareness, dimension, creation, and absolute. By focusing on each in sequence while forming corresponding hand seals, the practitioner created a complete mental framework for the mission ahead. Whether the syllables held actual mystical power was less important than the fact that believing they did enhanced performance made the impossible seem achievable. Meditation practices gave ninja another crucial advantage: the ability to endure isolation and boredom. Missions might require days of motionless waiting, of hiding in cramped spaces, of maintaining a false identity in enemy territory with no friendly contact. A mind untrained in meditation would fragment under such conditions, would become restless, make mistakes born of impatience or loneliness. But a ninja who could enter meditative states at will experienced time differently. Hours passed like minutes. Discomfort became irrelevant. The mission became the only reality. The philosophy also addressed the fundamental question that all warriors must confront: how does one kill without being destroyed by killing? Samurai resolved this through Bushido, the way of the warrior, which made death in battle the highest honor. But ninja could not rely on such consolations. Their work was hidden, without glory or recognition. They killed from shadow, often striking down the unsuspecting. How did one maintain psychological integrity while engaging in actions that violated every norm of civilized conduct? The answer lay in radical detachment. Through Buddhist practice, ninja learned to view themselves and their actions from a perspective that transcended personal identity. They were instruments, not actors. The ego that committed the deed was illusory, temporary, ultimately unreal. This was not mere rationalization, but a genuine shift in consciousness achieved through years of spiritual practice. It allowed ninja to function effectively in roles that would have driven ordinary people mad with guilt or moral confusion. Yet this detachment had its costs. The same practices that enabled extraordinary capability also created distance from normal human experience. Emotions, while controlled, never entirely disappeared. They merely moved to depths where conscious awareness rarely reached. Many ninja, particularly in later years, struggled with this legacy of their training. They had achieved superhuman capability at the expense of their humanity, had gained the whole world while potentially losing something essential in themselves. The spiritual practices of ninjutsu, like everything else in the art, were ultimately pragmatic. They worked, and working was what mattered. Whether the philosophical frameworks were literally true was less important than the results they produced. Through meditation, ritual, and ascetic practice, ninja accessed mental states that enhanced performance, enabled extraordinary endurance, and provided psychological frameworks for engaging in necessary but morally complex actions. As midnight descended on those mountain caves where aspirants trained, as the cold bit deeper and exhaustion threatened to overcome will, it was this spiritual foundation that sustained them. The body, they had learned, was merely temporary. The self was an illusion, fear was a ghost. And in the space beyond these illusions lay power, the power to become shadow, to achieve impossible things, to transcend the limitations that bound ordinary mortals. This was the mind behind the shadow, the invisible foundation upon which all visible capabilities rested. Without it, the 18 disciplines were merely techniques, impressive but ultimately limited. With it, those techniques became expressions of a consciousness that had touched something beyond the human, something that made legend indistinguishable from reality. In the Shadow Warrior's world, weapons were never merely instruments of death, but extensions of philosophy itself. Where samurai carried swords that announced their status and honor, ninja wielded tools that whispered rather than shouted, that served multiple purposes, that could be concealed or disguised as innocent objects. The ninja arsenal represented centuries of innovation, driven by a single imperative: accomplish the mission while remaining invisible. The shuriken, throwing stars and spikes, became the most iconic ninja weapon, though popular culture misunderstands their purpose. These weren't primarily killing tools, but instruments of distraction and psychological warfare. A shuriken thrown to strike a wall near an enemy's head could create the moment of confusion needed for escape. The star-shaped Hira shuriken came in dozens of designs, each balanced differently, each suited for specific throwing techniques. The spike-shaped bow shuriken could penetrate deeper, but required different throwing mechanics. Masters carried both types, selecting based on circumstances. Some shuriken were coated with poisons or feces to ensure that even minor wounds became infected and potentially fatal. The kunai, a multi-purpose tool shaped like a dagger, exemplified ninja pragmatism. Originally a gardening implement, it served as climbing aid, digging tool, prying device, and weapon. The ring at the base could attach to rope for throwing and retrieval. Kunai could be heated and used to start fires or cauterize wounds. In combat, they were deadly at close range, but more importantly, their innocent appearance meant they could be carried openly without arousing suspicion. The kusarigama, chain and sickle, transformed agricultural equipment into sophisticated weaponry. The weighted chain could entangle an opponent's weapon or limbs from beyond sword range, while the sickle finished the disabled enemy. Mastering it required understanding physics and timing, the ability to control two separate elements simultaneously. The kusarigama's genius lay in its versatility and the way it neutralized advantages of reach and strength that samurai relied upon. The Ninja 2 sword differed fundamentally from the samurai katana. Shorter, straighter, with a square guard, it prioritized function over beauty. The blade was not folded and refined like a katana, but forged for durability and ease of replacement. The scabbard became a tool chest. It could serve as a breathing tube when hiding underwater, a step for climbing walls, or a blunt weapon. The sword's length allowed use in confined spaces where longer blades were liabilities. Some Ninja 2 featured hollow pommels containing poison, lockpicks, or blinding powder. Poison represented another dimension of the ninja arsenal. Specialists cultivated knowledge passed through generations. Aconite from monkshood plants caused heart failure. Ricin from castor beans brought agonizing death. Compounds from certain mushrooms induced paralysis or hallucinations. Mineral poisons, arsenic, mercury, were obtained through mining contacts. Application methods varied, coating weapons, contaminating food or water, using blowguns to deliver poison darts. Some poisons acted immediately. Others worked slowly, allowing the ninja to be far away when symptoms appeared. The psychological impact of poison fear often exceeded its actual use. Enemies became paranoid, trusting no one, which itself served ninja purposes. Infiltration tools demonstrated remarkable ingenuity. The Kaginawa grappling hook came in folding designs that could be concealed until needed. Thrown with practiced accuracy, it caught on walls or roof edges, the rope providing access to otherwise unreachable locations.
Ashiko, foot claws, strapped to feet, turning them into climbing tools that could grip wood or stone.
Shuko, hand claws, served similar purposes while doubling as defensive weapons. Mizugumo water shoes were wooden devices that distributed weight, theoretically allowing brief walking on water surfaces, though their effectiveness remains debated. Breathing tubes, simple hollow reeds or bamboo, enabled hiding underwater for extended periods. Combined with waterproof containers for equipment, this allowed infiltration via moats or rivers that guards assumed provided security. Ukidaru, floating barrels, could conceal a ninja while drifting downstream past checkpoints. Every environmental feature became potential advantage through proper equipment. Smoke bombs and flash powders represented early chemical warfare. Combinations of sulfur, saltpeter, and various metal compounds created diversions, blinding flashes, choking smoke, or simply noise to mask movement. Some mixtures created illusions that enhanced the supernatural aura surrounding ninja, making witnesses believe they'd seen demons or magic rather than human skill. The true genius of the ninja arsenal wasn't individual weapons, but their integration. A mission might require grappling hooks for infiltration, kunai for breaching a lock, shuriken for distraction, sword for emergency combat, poison for the target, and smoke bombs for escape. Each tool was selected for weight, versatility, and mission requirements. Nothing was carried that served only one purpose, yet perhaps the most important weapon was invisible: knowledge. Knowing which tool to use when, understanding an enemy's weaknesses, recognizing opportunities, this intelligence transformed ordinary implements into instruments of impossible achievement. The weapons were merely extensions of the mind that wielded them, and that mind, forged through years of training and spiritual practice, remained the ninja's ultimate arsenal. There exists a kind of death that leaves the body walking, breathing, moving through the world, while the person who once inhabited it has ceased to exist. This was the achievement of Hensojutsu, the ninja art of disguise, and at its foundation lay the concept of Shichihode, the 7 ways of going. These were not mere costumes, but complete identities, lived so thoroughly that deception became indistinguishable from reality. The first disguise was the akindo, merchant. In feudal Japan, merchants traveled freely between territories, their commercial activities providing perfect cover for intelligence gathering. A ninja posing as a merchant would spend months learning an actual trade, textiles, pottery, medicine, until their knowledge became genuine. They memorized prices, trade routes, supplier relationships, the small talk of commerce. They carried actual goods and conducted real transactions, building a cover identity so solid that even prolonged scrutiny revealed nothing suspicious. While selling fabric, they observed troop movements, overheard strategic discussions, mapped fortifications. The disguise was so effective because it wasn't false, it was simply incomplete, hiding additional purposes beneath legitimate activity. The Hokashi, street performer, formed the second disguise. Jugglers, musicians, storytellers traveled freely and attracted crowds, providing perfect opportunities for observation and eavesdropping. A ninja might spend years mastering an instrument, or acrobatic skills, becoming genuinely talented enough to perform at noble courts. Their art opened doors that would remain closed to others, and audiences watching the performance never noticed the performer watching them, cataloguing faces, listening to unguarded conversations, noting security arrangements. The third disguise, Komuso, wandering priest, exploited religious privilege. These Buddhist monks wore deep basket hats that completely obscured their faces, carried flutes, and traveled collecting alms. The disguise provided anonymity while moving through checkpoints that would stop ordinary travelers. Religious respect prevented detailed questioning. A ninja could observe extensively while remaining essentially invisible, their identity completely concealed by sanctioned religious practice. The Sunigata, common laborer or farmer, formed the fourth disguise, perhaps the most versatile. Laborers existed everywhere, noticed by no one. A ninja working as a carpenter could spend weeks inside an enemy compound, learning layouts, identifying vulnerabilities, building relationships with guards and servants. The physical labor maintained their conditioning, while the mundane role deflected all suspicion. Farmers had reason to know terrain intimately, to travel at odd hours, to possess knowledge of roads and paths. The Sarugaku, entertainer or actor, provided the fifth disguise, similar to Hokashi, but focused on theatrical performance. These traveling troupes were welcomed in castles and military camps, providing entertainment that made soldiers drop their guard. A ninja with acting skills could perform while gathering intelligence, or use backstage access to reach restricted areas. The theatricality itself provided training in emotion control and character embodiment useful across all disguises. The sixth disguise was shuka, Buddhist monk or nun. Unlike the Komuso, these were mainstream religious figures who conducted ceremonies, taught, and counseled. The role provided intimate access to powerful figures seeking spiritual guidance, opportunities to learn secrets shared in confession-like settings. The appearance of holy detachment concealed intense observation. Monasteries also served as information networks, with ninja monks coordinating intelligence across regions. The seventh disguise, Ronin, masterless samurai, completed the set. These were warriors whose lords had died or who had been dismissed, wandering and seeking employment. The role explained martial skills while providing freedom of movement. A ninja as Ronin could offer services as a bodyguard or military instructor, gaining access to military planning while maintaining warrior identity that made combat skills unsurprising. Yet the true art transcended these 7 categories. Master ninja could blend disguises or create entirely new identities as circumstances required. The key was total commitment. A ninja living undercover didn't merely wear a costume, they became the role completely, thinking like that person, adopting their concerns and mannerisms, maintaining the character even in private. This required psychological flexibility that bordered on frightening, the ability to suppress one's true identity so thoroughly that it essentially ceased to exist. Living under deep cover for months or years took psychological toll. Ninja maintained false identities while surrounded by people they might eventually betray or kill, forming relationships that felt real even though they were strategic. They married, raised families, built reputations in communities, all while knowing these lives were temporary constructs that would be abandoned when missions demanded. The discipline required was immense, never breaking character, never revealing, knowledge that the role shouldn't possess, maintaining deception even under stress or threat. The complete erasure of self that disguise required represented perhaps the ultimate ninja achievement. They didn't pretend to be someone else, they became someone else, relegating their true identity to a locked compartment of consciousness, accessed only when absolutely necessary. This wasn't multiple personality disorder, but controlled, deliberate identity shifting developed through years of training, the person who entered disguise and the person who emerged from it were psychologically different, having experienced different lives, different relationships, different realities. In the shadow world of feudal Japan, where death wore 1,000 faces, there existed assassins whose most deadly weapon was one that male warriors could never possess: the power to make men believe they were safe. These were the kunoichi, female ninja, and their existence reveals a sophistication in the art of killing that transcended physical combat. Where male shinobi infiltrated through stealth and disguise, kunoichi walked through doors that opened willingly, entered chambers invited, and struck from positions of apparent vulnerability that were actually supreme tactical advantage. The very concept of female warriors contradicted everything feudal Japanese society proclaimed about gender. Women were supposed to be submissive, confined to domestic spheres, incapable of violence. This societal blindness became the kunoichi's greatest asset. Male guards who would scrutinize every man approaching their lord's chambers might barely glance at a beautiful woman, a servant, a concubine. The assumption of female harmlessness was so deeply ingrained that it created invisible paths to targets that no male ninja could access. Training for kunoichi began in childhood, like their male counterparts, but followed different emphases. Physical conditioning remained crucial. They learned combat, acrobatics, weapons, but psychological training dominated. They studied seduction not as sexuality but as psychological manipulation, understanding how to make men feel powerful, understood, desired. They learned to read emotions with extraordinary precision, to identify vulnerabilities in personality and exploit them. A kunoichi could spend an evening with a target and understand his fears, ambitions, insecurities better than his closest friends. The arsenal of a kunoichi reflected their unique operational environment. While they trained with conventional weapons, they specialized in implements that appeared innocent. The kanzashi, ornamental hairpin, could become a lethal stabbing weapon. Fans concealed bladed edges or poisoned tips. Cosmetics containers held toxins. Even the obi, the long sash of a kimono, could strangle or restrain. Everything a woman normally carried could become deadly in trained hands, and the deadliness remained invisible until the moment of attack. Poison was particularly associated with kunoichi operations. Women had access to kitchens, served food and drink, prepared medicine. A kunoichi working as a maid or concubine could contaminate a target's meals over time, creating illness that appeared natural. Some poisons acted slowly enough that the kunoichi would be long gone when death occurred. Others were contact poisons applied to clothing or bedding. The intimacy that women shared with powerful men, serving them, sleeping beside them, created countless opportunities that male assassins could never access. But the ultimate weapon was emotional manipulation. A kunoichi might spend months or years building a relationship with a target, becoming his confidant, his lover, someone he trusted completely. She listened to his secrets, offered comfort during crises, made herself indispensable to his emotional well-being. And when the mission required it, she destroyed him through assassination, betrayal, or manipulation that turned him against his own interests. The psychological devastation when such men realized the truth rivaled physical death. Some kunoichi became legendary. Mochizuki Chiyome, wife of a samurai lord, allegedly ran a network of female agents disguised as shrine maidens and performers. After her husband's death, she recruited orphaned girls and trained them in espionage, creating an intelligence network that served the powerful Takeda clan. Her operation demonstrated how kunoichi could organize sophisticated networks rather than working individually. The role demanded extraordinary psychological resilience. Kunoichi often worked in isolation, without the support networks male ninja might access. They formed intimate relationships as strategic deception, maintaining emotional detachment while appearing vulnerable and loving. They endured sexual situations as tactical necessities, separating their bodies from their missions, their true selves from the roles they performed. The psychological compartmentalization required exceeded even what male ninja achieved. Yet kunoichi faced unique vulnerabilities. Pregnancy could compromise missions. Emotional attachments, while usually controlled, sometimes became real. Targets occasionally evolved into genuine relationships that complicated operational objectives. The gender discrimination that made their work possible also meant their achievements were rarely recorded. While male ninja left historical traces, kunoichi operated in even deeper shadow. Their successes attributed to luck, divine intervention, or male masterminds rather than to their own deadly skills. The kunoichi represented the ultimate refinement of ninja philosophy. Victory achieved through understanding human psychology, through becoming what the enemy expected while being something entirely different. They proved that the deadliest warrior wasn't necessarily the strongest or fastest, but the one who could make an enemy welcome their own destruction. In a world that underestimated women, they turned that underestimation into a weapon sharper than any blade. In the year 1542, in the mountain province of Iga, a child was born who would become the most famous ninja in history, a man whose name would inspire equal measures of terror and respect, whose legend would eventually overshadow his actual achievements. His name was Hattori Hanzo, and he would prove that the line between shinobi and samurai was never as clear as history pretends. Hanzo was born into the Hattori clan, one of the three great ninja families of Iga, but his lineage contained a crucial element that set him apart: samurai blood. His father, Hattori Yasunaga, served the Matsudaira clan, the family that would become the Tokugawa, as both warrior and intelligence agent. This dual heritage meant young Hanzo received training that bridged two worlds: the martial honor of the samurai and the shadow skills of the shinobi. His childhood training in Iga followed the brutal regimen all ninja endured, but Hanzo demonstrated extraordinary aptitude. By age 16, he had already led his first military operation, commanding a unit in a night raid that captured an enemy fortress. The feat announced his capabilities to the warring factions of Japan. Here was a warrior who combined conventional military skill with unconventional methods, who could fight honorably in daylight and disappear into shadow when circumstances demanded. Hanzo entered service to Tokugawa Ieyasu, then known as Matsudaira Motoyasu, in the early 1560s. This relationship would define both their lives. Ieyasu was a minor daimyo, struggling for survival in an era when alliances shifted like sand and betrayal was standard practice. He needed more than conventional warriors. He needed intelligence, needed to know what his enemies planned before they struck. Hanzo provided this and more, building an espionage network that gave Ieyasu advantages his rivals couldn't counter. The defining moment came in 1582, following the incident at Honnoji, when the great unifier Oda Nobunaga was betrayed and killed by his own general. Ieyasu found himself stranded in hostile territory with only a small escort, every route home controlled by enemies who would certainly kill him. This was the moment Hanzo earned his legend. Using his Iga connections, he guided Ieyasu through mountain passes that no army could follow, navigating routes only ninja knew. He negotiated safe passage through territories ruled by former enemies, leveraging relationships built through years of intelligence work. Against impossible odds, he delivered Ieyasu home safely through what became known as the Iga Crossing, a journey that cemented both their fames. But Hanzo's service went beyond dramatic escapes. He commanded Ieyasu's intelligence network, coordinating agents across Japan who provided the information that allowed strategic victories. He led military operations when circumstances required conventional force, proving himself capable in open battle as well as shadow warfare. When Ieyasu finally unified Japan and became shogun in 1603, Hanzo's contribution was undeniable. The intelligence he provided had been as crucial as any army. Yet success brought complications. As Ieyasu's power grew, so did Hanzo's reputation until he became something more than human in popular imagination. Stories multiplied. That he could teleport, that he commanded demons, that he could disappear and reappear at will. Some claimed he could predict the future or read minds. The real Hanzo, a brilliant strategist, exceptional warrior, and master of intelligence operations, disappeared behind the myth of Hattori Hanzo, the supernatural ninja. The truth was impressive enough without embellishment. Hanzo created the Oniwaban, the shogunate's secret intelligence service, establishing systems that would function for centuries. He recruited and trained agents, developed communication networks, established protocols for gathering and analyzing information. He transformed informal ninja practices into bureaucratic structures that served the new government's needs. Hanzo died in 1596, before seeing Ieyasu's final triumph, but his legacy endured through his descendants and the organizations he created. The Hattori family continued serving the Tokugawa for generations. The neighborhood in Tokyo where he lived, Hanzomon, still bears his name. The gate he guarded became one of the most famous landmarks in Japan's capital. What made Hanzo legendary wasn't supernatural powers, but the ability to bridge worlds that were supposed to remain separate. He proved that ninja skills and samurai status weren't incompatible, that honor and espionage could coexist, that a warrior could operate in shadow without losing legitimacy in sunlight. He transformed ninjutsu from a desperate art practiced by outcasts into a recognized tool of statecraft. Yet perhaps his greatest achievement was surviving with reputation intact. Most ninja who became famous did so through failure, captured, exposed, dying dramatically. Hanzo succeeded repeatedly, served one master loyally throughout his life, died peacefully, and was honored rather than erased. In a profession defined by invisibility and denied existence, he achieved something almost impossible: recognition, respect, and a place in official history. The name Hattori Hanzo became synonymous with the ninja ideal, representing the highest possibility of what shadow warriors could achieve. Every legend that grew around him, every supernatural attribution, testified to the profound impact he had on his era. The real man may have been less magical than myth suggests, but he was something perhaps more remarkable, a human being who mastered impossible skills and used them to change the course of history. Five centuries before the CIA, MI6, or KGB, the ninjas of feudal Japan had already developed intelligence networks of remarkable sophistication. What modern nations would discover through technological advancement and bureaucratic organization, the shinobi achieved through human ingenuity, psychological insight, and methods so effective they remain studied by intelligence agencies today. The foundation of ninja espionage was categorization of agents by function and risk. The Mitsumono, seeing people, were scouts and observers who gathered information through direct observation. These agents worked at lower risk, watching troop movements, counting soldiers, noting supply routes. They were eyes, not hands, observing without engaging. A Mitsumono might pose as a farmer working fields near a military camp, spending weeks mentally cataloging everything observed: guard rotations, officer habits, morale indicators before departing to report. The kancho represented deeper infiltration. These agents didn't merely observe from outside but penetrated target organizations, sometimes for years. A kancho might become a servant in an enemy lord's household, a clerk in a merchant company, a student at a military academy. They gathered information from inside, accessing documents, overhearing planning sessions, learning secrets that external observation could never reveal. The psychological demands were immense, maintaining false identity while surrounded by enemies, never breaking character, waiting months or years for the crucial intelligence that justified the mission. The Teisatsu were tactical scouts operating near battlefields, gathering immediate intelligence that affected current operations. They moved ahead of armies, reporting on enemy positions, terrain conditions, local sentiment. Speed and accuracy mattered more than subtlety. Their information needed to reach commanders fast enough to influence decisions. Teisatsu often worked in pairs or small teams, with redundancy ensuring critical intelligence reached its destination even if some agents were captured or killed. Communication methods demonstrated remarkable ingenuity. Dead drops, predetermined locations where messages could be left and retrieved without direct contact, prevented agents from being connected to handlers, even if under surveillance. A message hidden inside a hollow bamboo pole left at a specific shrine, a mark on a particular tree indicating information was ready for pickup, a seemingly random stone arrangement that actually spelled coded instructions. These techniques protected networks from infiltration. Coding and encryption reached sophisticated levels. Simple substitution ciphers gave way to complex systems where symbols represented concepts rather than letters, where the same mark meant different things depending on context or accompanying indicators. Some codes were poetic, messages hidden within apparently innocent poems, with specific syllables or characters containing the actual intelligence. Others were mathematical, using number sequences that seemed like accounting records but encrypted military data. Memory techniques allowed agents to carry vast amounts of information without written records that could be captured. Ninja learned mnemonic systems that converted data into mental images, created memory palaces where information was stored in imagined architectural spaces that could be mentally navigated. An agent could memorize the complete layout of a fortress, positions of guards, schedules of patrols, and retrieve these details weeks later with perfect accuracy, all without carrying a single piece of incriminating evidence. The intelligence cycle, collection, analysis, dissemination, action was understood and practiced systematically. Raw information from multiple sources was correlated and analyzed at safe houses in Eiga or Koga, where specialists identified patterns and strategic implications. Priority intelligence was rushed to clients through courier networks. Less urgent but still valuable information was compiled into periodic reports. The distinction between tactical intelligence, immediate battlefield use, and strategic intelligence, long-term planning, was clearly understood and managed differently. Networks were compartmentalized for security. Individual agents knew only what they needed for their specific role. If captured and forced to talk, they could compromise only their immediate contacts, not the entire network. Cell structures isolated different operational groups. Even within families, some members might not know others were active agents. This compartmentalization frustrated enemy counterintelligence efforts. Capturing one ninja rarely exposed others. Counterintelligence received equal attention. Ninja planted false information, created double agents who appeared to betray their organizations while actually spreading disinformation. They fed different versions of plans to different people, watching to see which version leaked and thus identifying traitors. They created entire fake operations to waste enemy resources or draw attention away from real missions. The sophistication extended to human intelligence recruitment. Ninja understood motivations that made people betray their own side: money, revenge, ideology, blackmail, love. They identified vulnerable individuals, the underappreciated clerk, the passed-over officer, the merchant facing bankruptcy, and cultivated them carefully. Recruitment was gradual, starting with small requests that seemed innocent. progressively compromising the target until they were thoroughly entangled. What made ninja intelligence networks extraordinary wasn't any single technique, but their integration. They combined human intelligence with signals intelligence, observing smoke signals, messenger movements, open-source intelligence, analyzing publicly available information, and even early forms of technical intelligence, studying weapon designs, fortification plans. This comprehensive approach, refined over generations, produced intelligence capabilities that gave clients decisive advantages. Modern intelligence agencies studying historical ninja methods recognize the sophistication. The principles remain valid. Compartmentalization protects networks, dead drops prevent compromise, memory techniques secure information, careful recruitment builds assets. 500 years before satellites and computers, Ninja had solved problems that intelligence agencies still grapple with. Proof that the human dimension of espionage transcends technology, that understanding psychology and organization matters more than gadgets. There is a kind of victory that requires no battle, a defeat so complete that enemies surrender before swords are drawn. The ninja understood this principle profoundly. The most effective weapon isn't steel but the mind itself, and the greatest achievement is making opponents destroy themselves through their own terror and confusion. Psychological warfare became not just a tactic, but an art form, refined over centuries until fear itself became the sharpest blade in the shinobi arsenal. The foundation of ninja psychological operations was the cultivation of supernatural reputation. In an era when most people genuinely believed in demons, spirits, and magic, the ninja deliberately blurred the line between human capability and supernatural power. They moved so silently that witnesses swore they'd vanished into thin air. They appeared in locked rooms, seemingly passing through walls. They survived falls that should have killed them, disappeared when surrounded, knew secrets they couldn't possibly have learned. Each impossible feat reinforced the belief that ninja possessed supernatural powers, and that belief became self-fulfilling. Enemies paralyzed by fear made mistakes that ensured their defeat. Creating ghost legends was systematic. After successful operations, ninja would leave deliberate traces designed to enhance mystery rather than reveal truth. Strange symbols marked on walls, unusual objects left behind, witnesses who glimpsed something that seemed inhuman, all carefully orchestrated to build mythology. Rumors were planted and allowed to spread naturally, each retelling adding embellishments that made the ninja seem more terrifying. A successful assassination might be attributed to demon intervention rather than human action, and ninja did nothing to correct this misunderstanding. Let enemies believe they faced supernatural forces. Fear of the unknown is more potent than fear of the known. Strategic terror operations targeted specific psychological vulnerabilities. A lord known to be superstitious might find strange occurrences in his castle, unexplained sounds, moved objects, mysterious messages designed to undermine his mental stability. Sleep deprivation tactics kept targets awake for days, making them paranoid and irrational. Gaslighting operations made victims question their own perceptions and sanity. The goal wasn't merely intimidation but psychological destruction, breaking enemies without physical violence. The use of pyrotechnics and chemicals enhanced supernatural mystique. Flash powders created blinding light that seemed magical. Smoke bombs allowed disappearances that appeared to be teleportation. Certain chemical mixtures produced colored flames, green, blue, purple, that ancient Japanese had no framework for understanding except through supernatural explanation. Sound devices created noises that seemed inhuman. All of these effects, understood by ninja as simple chemistry and physics, appeared to witnesses as magic or demonic power. Misinformation campaigns spread through controlled rumors destroyed reputations and alliances. A ninja network might plant stories about a lord's loyalty, create false evidence of betrayals, forge compromising documents. The target would find allies suspicious, subordinates questioning orders, rivals emboldened by perceived weakness. The resulting paranoia often accomplished what direct action never could. Targets isolated themselves, made irrational decisions, collapsed from internal rather than external pressure. The timing of operations amplified psychological impact. Attacks during storms, when thunder and lightning masked sounds and created atmosphere of chaos. Operations on nights of religious significance, when guards might be distracted by rituals or celebrations. Strikes during moments of apparent security, shattering the illusion of safety. The psychological message was clear: nowhere was safe, no precaution sufficient, no defense reliable. Selective targeting demonstrated both capability and restraint in ways that maximized fear. Rather than attempting to kill a well-guarded lord, ninja might assassinate his most trusted bodyguard, demonstrating they could reach anyone, implying the lord lived only because they chose to let him. Leaving a warning knife on a sleeping target's pillow delivered the message more effectively than actual assassination. We could have killed you, but chose not to this time. The uncertainty about when or whether the next attack would come created ongoing psychological torture. Perhaps the ultimate psychological operation was the illusion of omniscience. Through their intelligence networks, ninja often knew secrets about targets, private conversations, hidden affairs, financial troubles that seemed impossible to discover. Revealing this knowledge suggested supernatural surveillance, making targets paranoid about discussing anything sensitive. The psychological burden of believing one was constantly watched, that no secret was safe, broke stronger men than violence ever could. The greatest ninja victories were invisible. Enemies who surrendered without fighting, lords who abandoned strategies because they believed ninja opposed them, battles won because opponents were too paranoid to function effectively. These represented perfect execution. When the enemy defeated himself through his own fear, when terror did the work that violence would have required, the ninja had achieved their highest art. Modern psychological operations, psyops, employ technology the ninja never imagined, but the principles remain unchanged. Understanding what enemies fear, exploiting those fears systematically, creating uncertainty and paranoia, destroying psychological stability, these methods prove that the human mind remains the most critical battlefield. 5 centuries ago, without computers or mass media, ninja had already mastered these dark arts, proving that the sharpest blade has always been the one that cuts through consciousness itself. In September 1579, one of history's most powerful warlords turned his full attention toward a collection of mountain villages that had defied him once too often.
Oda Nobunaga, the man who had broken the power of Buddhist warrior monks,
Who had crushed rival daimyo across Japan, who was methodically unifying the nation through overwhelming military force, decided that Aiga province and its shadow warriors must be completely destroyed. What followed was a conflict that would test whether ninja skills could survive against overwhelming conventional military superiority. Nobunaga's hatred of Iga was both personal and strategic. The province had humiliated him in 1579 when his son, Oda Nobukatsu, attempted to invade with 10,000 troops and was decisively defeated by Aiga's defenders. The young commander's forces were ambushed, scattered, and driven back with heavy losses, an embarrassment that Nobunaga could not tolerate. But beyond personal pride, Iga represented something Nobunaga despised: autonomous power that refused integration into his new order. The ninja clans answered to no lord, followed no conventional hierarchy, existed outside the social system he was creating. For his vision of unified Japan, they had to be eliminated. The first invasion in 1579 revealed that conventional tactics wouldn't work. Iga's geography provided natural fortifications, mountains, forests, narrow passes where superior numbers became irrelevant. The ninja knew every path, every hidden trail, every cave and canyon. They fought using guerrilla tactics that negated Nobunaga's advantages, ambushing supply lines, striking at night then melting into forest, avoiding direct confrontation while inflicting constant casualties. The samurai army, trained for open battle, found themselves fighting an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't catch, couldn't force into decisive engagement. Nobunaga learned from failure. In 1581, he assembled a force that dwarfed the first invasion, over 40,000 samurai, armed with the latest weapons including firearms, led by experienced commanders with orders to show no mercy. This wasn't just military conquest, but extermination. Nobunaga's forces entered Iga simultaneously from multiple directions, preventing the defenders from concentrating resistance. They employed scorched earth tactics, burning villages and crops, killing civilians alongside warriors, destroying the economic base that supported the ninja clans. The Iga defenders numbered perhaps 4,000, men, women, and even children who could fight. They understood that conventional battle meant certain death, so they reverted to what they knew best: shadow warfare elevated to desperate art. They booby-trapped forests with hidden pits and concealed blades. They poisoned water sources used by the invading army. They conducted night raids that left sentries dead and camps in chaos. They used their knowledge of terrain to lead entire units into ambushes or dead-end valleys. But numbers and resources ultimately mattered. Nobunaga's army could absorb casualties that would cripple the defenders. Every Iga warrior who fell was irreplaceable. Nobunaga had reserves to draw upon. The invaders advanced methodically, consolidating control over each area before moving forward, denying the ninja space to maneuver. Villages were burned systematically. Families were slaughtered to prevent future resistance. The forests that had protected the ninja became their prison as the perimeter contracted. The siege lasted weeks of brutal fighting where the rules of war dissolved entirely. Ninja employed every weapon in their arsenal: explosives to destroy bridges and fortifications, psychological warfare to terrorize enemy troops, desperate counterattacks that inflicted disproportionate casualties. They fought with the fury of people defending their homes against extermination. But Nobunaga's forces pressed forward relentlessly, tightening the noose, destroying resistance pocket by pocket. In the end, Iga fell not through decisive battle, but through systematic destruction. The ninja clans were shattered, their villages burned, their population decimated. Survivors fled to Koga or scattered across Japan, becoming refugees in a land that suddenly had no place for them. The province that had birthed ninjutsu, that had maintained independence through centuries of warfare, was crushed in weeks once sufficient force was applied with ruthless efficiency. Yet even in defeat, the ninja demonstrated their adaptability. Many survived by abandoning Iga entirely, taking their skills elsewhere, offering services to lords who recognized their value. Some went underground so completely that they seemed to disappear from history. Others, ironically, entered service with Nobunaga's eventual successor, Tokugawa Ieyasu, who understood that exterminating useful assets was wasteful when they could be redirected toward his purposes. The Tensho-Iga War proved that ninja weren't invincible. That insufficient conventional force applied with total commitment could crush even the most skilled guerrilla fighters. But it also demonstrated their extraordinary capabilities, that 4,000 unconventional warriors could inflict significant casualties on an army 10 times their size, could resist for weeks against overwhelming odds, could force one of history's greatest military commanders to commit enormous resources to defeating them. Nobunaga's victory was complete but costly, purchasing the destruction of Iga with blood and treasure that might have been spent elsewhere. The ninja had lost their homeland but survived as a concept, as a methodology, as a persistent shadow that would haunt Japanese warfare for centuries to come. Ego was gone, but ninjutsu endured, proving that ideas are harder to kill than people, that techniques survive the destruction of those who practice them. There are nights in history when everything changes because one person dies at the wrong moment, when a single blade in the darkness alters the course of nations. The ninja specialized in these impossible operations, penetrating defenses that should have been impenetrable, reaching targets who should have been unreachable, accomplishing missions that conventional warriors would never attempt. These weren't mere killings, but surgical strikes that demonstrated capabilities bordering on supernatural. Azuchi Castle represented the pinnacle of 16th century military architecture, Oda Nobunaga's masterpiece, designed specifically to be assassination-proof. Built on a mountain surrounded by walls within walls, guarded by hundreds of elite samurai, it incorporated every defensive innovation known to Japanese military engineering. The innermost chambers where Nobunaga slept were accessible only through multiple checkpoints, each staffed by trusted guards who knew every authorized person by sight. Approaching it seemed impossible. Entering it undetected was beyond imagination. Yet ninja did exactly that multiple times. They studied guard rotations for months, memorizing every pattern and exception. They identified servants, learning schedules of cleaning staff, food deliveries, maintenance workers. They discovered that even the most elaborate security had rhythms, moments when attention naturally lapsed, transitions between shifts when confusion provided opportunity. Some infiltrations took the form of long-term deep cover. A ninja might work as a gardener or carpenter for months, becoming familiar and trusted, eventually gaining access to restricted areas. The techniques varied with circumstances. Some infiltrations used physical skill, scaling walls during storms when rain masked sound, using grappling hooks to reach supposedly inaccessible windows, moving across roofs with inhuman silence. Others employed social engineering, forging documents that authorized entry, impersonating officials who had legitimate access, exploiting hierarchies where lower-ranking guards didn't question superior officers. The most sophisticated operations combined both approaches, using physical access to plant agents who could then open routes for others. The attempted assassination of Nobunaga himself demonstrated both ninja capabilities and limitations. On several occasions, assassins penetrated his defenses, reaching positions from which they could strike. Yet, Nobunaga survived. Through luck, paranoia that made him change sleeping locations unpredictably, or possibly intelligence warnings that allowed countermeasures. The fact that attempts occurred proved ninja could reach him. That he survived proved even perfect infiltration didn't guarantee success against a sufficiently alert and protected target. Other missions succeeded with devastating effect. The assassination of Daimyo Imagawa Yoshimoto in 1560, though not definitively attributed to ninja, bore their hallmarks: a heavily guarded lord killed during what should have been a secure moment. No clear explanation for how assassins reached him. Similar mysterious deaths littered the Sengoku period: lords found dead in locked rooms, generals killed despite bodyguards, heirs who died before they could inherit. Not all were ninja operations, but enough bore the signature of impossible access and inexplicable method to suggest shadow warrior involvement. Midnight strikes represented the quintessential ninja operation, attacking when humans are least alert, when darkness provides maximum advantage, when psychological terror amplifies effect. A ninja team might infiltrate a castle, eliminate specific targets with poison or blade, and withdraw before discovery, leaving guards to find bodies in the morning with no explanation for how killers entered and escaped. The psychological impact equaled the tactical effect. If defenses could be penetrated so completely, nowhere was safe. Some missions targeted not individuals, but information. Ninja infiltrated to steal documents, copy military plans, learn strategic intentions. A shinobi might spend hours in a study copying correspondence by moonlight or memorize documents too dangerous to physically remove. These intelligence operations, less dramatic than assassinations, often provided greater strategic value. Knowing enemy plans allowed preempting them, turning enemy strategy into advantage. The greatest impossibility wasn't physical infiltration, but maintaining operational security. These missions required extensive planning, multiple personnel, equipment, intelligence about target defenses. Yet they succeeded with regularity that suggested sophisticated organizations capable of planning and executing complex operations while maintaining secrecy that prevented counterintelligence from disrupting them. This organizational capability, coordinating multiple specialists, maintaining communication, preserving security, represented achievement as impressive as any individual infiltration. Not every mission succeeded. Captured ninja were interrogated and executed. Failed operations exposed methods, forcing evolution of new techniques. The defenses ninja overcame became more sophisticated as targets learned from failures. This created an arms race between defensive innovation and infiltration capability, each side learning from the other, pushing both toward greater sophistication. What made these missions historically significant wasn't just their execution, but their strategic impact. Removing key individuals at crucial moments changed succession disputes, altered alliance patterns, shifted power balances. Intelligence operations revealed plans that once known could be countered. The ninja's invisible hand shaped history through actions that often remained unknown, their successes attributed to fortune or divine intervention rather than human skill. These impossible missions proved that security is always relative, that human vigilance has limits, that clever adversaries can find weaknesses in any defense. They established principles that remain valid. Long-term infiltration beats short-term raids. Patient planning trumps bold improvisation. Understanding psychology matters more than physical prowess. 5 centuries later, special operations forces study these historical ninja missions, recognizing that the fundamentals of impossible operations transcend technology and culture. In the year 1603, Tokugawa Ieyasu received the title of shogun, formalizing his control over a Japan that had finally emerged from 150 years of continuous warfare. The Sengoku period, the age of warring states that had birthed and sustained the ninja, was over. Peace descended across the archipelago, and with it came a terrible question for the shadow warriors. What happens to weapons designed for war when war itself disappears? The unification brought immediate and profound changes. Ieyasu established the Tokugawa shogunate that would rule Japan for over 250 years, creating stability through strict social control and political genius. Daimyo were reorganized, their domains assigned strategically to prevent alliance against the shogunate. The samurai class was transformed from actual warriors into bureaucratic administrators. Strict class distinctions froze society into hereditary categories, and most significantly for ninja, internal warfare became virtually impossible under the Pax Tokugawa. The ninja's traditional employment disappeared almost overnight. Daimyo no longer needed intelligence about rival lords' military preparations because military action between domains was prohibited under pain of annihilation. Assassinations of political rivals became unnecessary when the shogunate settled disputes through administrative means. Infiltration operations had no purpose when internal conflict was suppressed. The chaos that had sustained ninja operations for generations vanished, replaced by order that had no room for shadow warriors. Yet Ieyasu, having employed ninja throughout his rise to power, understood their value even in peacetime. Rather than attempting to eliminate them, a project that would have been difficult and wasteful, he transformed them. The most talented ninja, particularly from the Iga and Koga clans, were recruited into the Oniwaban, the shogunate's official intelligence service. These agents became government employees, receiving stipends and status in exchange for directing their skills toward maintaining Tokugawa power rather than serving the highest bidder. The Oniwaban's mission differed fundamentally from traditional ninja work. Instead of gathering military intelligence or conducting assassinations, they monitored domestic threats to shogunate stability. They watched for signs of daimyo preparing rebellion, infiltrated groups suspected of Christian proselytizing. Christianity was banned as destabilizing foreign influence, investigated corruption among officials, and maintained surveillance on anyone who might threaten the established order. The skills remained similar, but the purpose had shifted from enabling change to preventing it. This transformation required painful adaptation. Ninja had been independent operators, serving clients temporarily, moving between employers as circumstances dictated. Now they became permanent government agents, bound by regulations, answerable to bureaucratic superiors, their operations subject to approval and oversight. The freedom that had characterized ninja existence, the ability to refuse missions, to negotiate terms, to maintain independence, was sacrificed for security and legitimacy. The martial aspects of ninjutsu began deteriorating almost immediately. Combat skills, perfected over generations of actual warfare, had no application in peacetime. Training continued but became increasingly theoretical, taught by masters who had never used techniques in real operations to students who never would. The gap between knowledge and application widened with each generation. Techniques designed for life or death situations became ritualized performances, their practical effectiveness unknown and untested. Economic changes accelerated the decline. Peace brought prosperity, but prosperity changed social dynamics. The marginal communities that had sustained ninja clans, poor mountain villages where unconventional skills meant survival, began integrating into the broader economy. Why train for years in assassination techniques when rice farming or merchant work provided stable income? Why maintain secrecy and isolation when mainstream society offered opportunity? The economic necessity that had sustained ninjutsu across generations disappeared. By the mid-17th century, authentic ninja were becoming rare. The Oniwaban employed perhaps a few hundred agents who could claim legitimate lineage and training. Outside government service, ninja skills survived mainly as family traditions, passed down more as cultural heritage than practical capability. Scrolls documenting techniques were preserved, but increasingly, they recorded knowledge that no living practitioner fully understood or could effectively apply. The irony was profound. Peace, the ostensible goal of all warfare, destroyed the warriors who had been most effective during war. Samurai adapted by becoming administrators, maintaining status even without combat function. Ninja, lacking equivalent social position, simply faded. Some families maintained traditions, but these became increasingly divorced from the realities that had created them. The shadow warriors who had shaped history through invisible influence became themselves invisible, not through skill, but through obsolescence. Yet something survived beyond practical technique. The idea of the ninja, the mystique of the shadow warrior, the legend of impossible capabilities, endured and even grew during the Tokugawa period. Kabuki theater and popular literature created increasingly fantastical ninja, depicting supernatural abilities that real shinobi never possessed. These fictional ninja became more famous than the historical warriors who inspired them, creating a mythology that would eventually circle the globe. The Tokugawa peace proved that martial arts, however sophisticated, are ultimately products of their time. When the conditions that birthed them disappear, they either adapt or die. Ninjutsu chose adaptation, becoming first bureaucratic tool, then cultural memory, finally global myth. The shadow warriors themselves faded, but the shadow they cast across history would prove permanent. The Edo period, spanning from 1603 to 1868, represented the longest continuous peace in Japanese history, and within that peace, the ninja underwent a transformation so complete it bordered on metamorphosis. The shadow warriors who had once moved through darkness dealing death became, of all things, government bureaucrats. It was a transformation that saved them from extinction but killed something essential in the process. The Oniwaban, literally garden keepers, embodied this transformation. Established by Tokugawa Ieyasu and expanded by his successors, these were official intelligence agents serving the shogunate directly. The name itself was deliberately misleading, suggesting harmless gardeners rather than spies and investigators. Many Oniwaban came from Iga and Koga families, bringing ninja skills into government service. But everything about their employment differed from their ancestors' work. Oniwaban operated within bureaucratic structures that would have baffled traditional ninja. They received regular stipends, filed reports through official channels, answered to appointed supervisors who were often samurai administrators with no intelligence background. Missions required approval from multiple levels of authority. Operations were documented, creating paper trails that ninja had historically avoided like poison. The spontaneity and independence that had characterized shadow warfare disappeared beneath layers of procedure and oversight. Their work focused primarily on domestic surveillance. Oniwaban monitored daimyo for signs of rebellion, investigated corruption among officials, infiltrated groups suspected of threatening shogunate stability. They watched for Christian converts, Christianity remained banned as foreign contamination, and tracked masterless samurai who might become troublemakers. This was espionage turned inward, focused not on external enemies, but on maintaining internal control. The techniques remained nominally similar to traditional ninjutsu. Oniwaban still practiced disguise, conducted covert surveillance, gathered intelligence through infiltration. But the context had fundamentally changed. They weren't operating in enemy territory with death as consequence of discovery, but rather within a controlled society where their authority provided some protection. The stakes, while still significant, weren't the life or death extremes that had sharpened their predecessors' skills. Most critically, combat skills began deteriorating. The Edo period's rigid peace meant Oniwaban rarely faced situations requiring violence. Techniques for silent killing, for fighting multiple opponents, for escape under fire, all the martial aspects that had defined ninjutsu became theoretical knowledge rather than practical capability. Masters taught students who would never use these techniques, who would teach subsequent generations equally inexperienced. Knowledge preserved in kata and scrolls grew increasingly divorced from application. This erosion was gradual but inexorable. Each generation possessed slightly less practical understanding than the previous. Techniques that had been intuitive to warriors forged in actual conflict became puzzles for peacetime practitioners. The scrolls remained, the movements were practiced, but the vital essence, the ability to apply these skills effectively under life-threatening pressure, faded like ink exposed to sunlight. Economic and social changes accelerated the decline. As Japan's economy developed during the long peace, the marginal mountain communities that had sustained ninja clans became integrated into mainstream society. Young people from Iga and Koga families increasingly pursued conventional careers, merchant work, scholarship, even samurai status for those who could claim appropriate heritage. Why dedicate life to mastering skills that had no application when other paths offered better prospects? The few families that maintained serious practice did so more as cultural preservation than practical training. They became custodians of tradition rather than active practitioners, their knowledge increasingly historical rather than operational. The transformation from warrior to bureaucrat was complete when ninja skills became items in a museum rather than tools in active use. Yet the Oniwaban served genuine purpose during the Edo period. Their intelligence work helped maintain the stability that allowed Japanese culture to flourish. They prevented conspiracies that might have reignited civil war, identified threats before they materialized, provided the shogunate with information necessary for effective governance. They were effective, just not as ninja in the traditional sense. The irony was profound and painful. The Tokugawa peace that ninja had helped establish destroyed the very conditions that made ninja possible. Success created the environment where their skills became obsolete. They had worked themselves out of a job so thoroughly that within a few generations, authentic ninjutsu was more legend than reality, preserved in scrolls that fewer and fewer people could properly interpret. By the time the Edo period ended in 1868 with the Meiji Restoration, the transformation was complete. The Oniwaban were disbanded as Japan modernized, adopting Western governmental structures. The last practitioners who had maintained some connection to authentic techniques died, taking with them experiential knowledge that scrolls alone couldn't capture. The age of the ninja was over, ended not by defeat, but by evolution into something unrecognizable. What survived was memory, increasingly distorted, progressively romanticized, but persistent. The ninja hadn't disappeared. They had transformed into something that could survive in peace, sacrificing practical lethality for cultural immortality. It was survival, but survival purchased at the cost of everything that had made them what they were. There exists a fascinating paradox at the heart of ninja history. The more famous they became, the less accurate the image. The shadow warriors of feudal Japan have been so thoroughly mythologized, so completely transformed by popular culture, that separating historical reality from entertaining fiction requires archaeological precision and willingness. To disappoint those who prefer legend truth, the
Most persistent myth, the black-clad
assassin moving through night, is almost entirely wrong. Historical ninja didn't wear distinctive uniforms that advertised their profession. The iconic black outfit seen in countless films and comic books is a theatrical invention, originating in Japanese kabuki theater, where stagehands dressed in black, indicating invisibility to the audience, were occasionally used to represent ninja, creating the association. Actual ninja wore whatever clothing suited their cover identity: farmer clothes, merchant robes, religious vestments. When stealth operations required dark clothing, they typically used dark blue or dark brown rather than pure black, as these colors provided better camouflage in moonlight and shadow than absolute black, which can appear as an unnatural void. The weapons associated with ninja in popular culture are similarly exaggerated. Shuriken existed but weren't primary weapons. They were supplementary tools, often used for distraction rather than killing. The dramatic shuriken throws in movies, with dozens of stars embedded in walls around a target, bear little resemblance to how these weapons were actually employed. Ninja used conventional weapons, swords, spears, bows, adapted to their specific needs, not an exotic arsenal of specialized implements. The kusarigama and other distinctive weapons did exist, but weren't uniquely ninja tools. They were farming implements adapted for combat by various groups. Supernatural abilities attributed to ninja invisibility, walking on water, transforming into animals, were deliberate psychological operations rather than actual capabilities. Ninja cultivated these myths using practical techniques that seemed magical to observers lacking context. Walking on water involved specialized equipment or knowledge of hidden paths like submerged bridges. Invisibility was mastery of stealth, timing, and understanding of human perception. Transformation meant exceptional skill at disguise and impersonation. These were remarkable human achievements, but human nonetheless. Historical evidence from the Edo period and later provides clearer picture of what ninja actually were. Surviving scrolls, most famously the Bansenshukai compiled in 1676 and the Shoninki from 1681, document techniques in practical terms that reveal both capabilities and limitations. These texts discuss espionage methods, psychology, strategy, and martial techniques in ways that emphasize human skill rather than supernatural power. They're technical manuals, not mystical grimoires. Archaeological discoveries have further clarified reality. Excavations at sites associated with ninja activity reveal ordinary tools adapted for specific purposes, practical weapons rather than exotic implements.
Living conditions that were austere but not dramatically different from other rural communities.
The physical evidence suggests people who are highly trained specialists,
not magical beings. The historical record shows ninja as employees, specialists hired for specific tasks.
Professionals operating within economic and social constraints. They weren't lone wolf assassins, but members of organized groups, often family-based, that maintained training and passed knowledge through generations. Their work was systematic and methodical rather than spontaneous and individual. They succeeded through preparation, intelligence, and exploiting human psychology rather than through supernatural intervention or impossible physical feats. Modern scholarship has also revealed class and social dimensions often ignored in popular portrayals. Many ninja came from marginalized communities, farmers, outcasts, religious minorities, who developed unconventional warfare as a survival strategy in a rigidly hierarchical society. Their skills represented adaptation to disadvantage rather than inherent superiority. Understanding this context makes their achievements more impressive, not less. They succeeded despite structural disadvantages, not because of magical advantages. The mythology isn't entirely wrong, it's exaggerated and distorted. Ninja were exceptional, their skills remarkable, their achievements historically significant. They did accomplish missions that seemed impossible, did develop techniques centuries ahead of their time, did influence history in ways disproportionate to their numbers. But they did this as humans, through dedication, training, intelligence, and courage rather than through magic. Separating myth from reality doesn't diminish ninja. It reveals them as more interesting than fiction suggests. The real story of humans developing sophisticated techniques through systematic training, achieving remarkable results through understanding psychology and tactics, maintaining operational security across generations. This is fascinating without embellishment. The truth that dedicated training and systematic methodology can produce extraordinary capabilities has more value than tales of supernatural powers. The myths persist because they serve needs that history alone cannot. People want to believe in the supernatural, in individuals who transcend normal limitations, in the possibility that dedication to an art can produce miraculous abilities. The ninja myth provides this, which ensures its survival regardless of historical correction. But for those interested in what humans can actually achieve, the historical reality offers richer lessons than any legend. In a small training hall in Noda, Japan, an elderly master demonstrates a technique passed down through 26 generations. His movements are fluid, economical, containing knowledge refined across centuries. His students, some Japanese, many from distant countries, practice with reverence that transcends mere martial arts training. This is one of the last living connections to authentic ninjutsu, and the question haunting everyone present is whether these ancient techniques can survive in the modern world, or whether they're witnessing the final generation of a dying art. Masaki Hatsumi, born in 1931, became the most significant figure in modern ninjutsu preservation. As the inheritor of 9 traditional schools, including Togakure-ryu, supposedly tracing lineage back 900 years, he faced a choice when Western interest in ninja exploded during the 1970s and 1980s. He could maintain absolute secrecy, allowing the art to die with its few remaining practitioners, or share knowledge with the world, risking dilution but ensuring some form of survival. He chose globalization. Through his organization, the Bujinkan, Hatsumi taught thousands of students worldwide, creating a network that ensured ninjutsu techniques would persist even if traditional Japanese transmission failed. This was controversial. Purists argued that teaching foreigners betrayed centuries of secrecy, that true ninjutsu couldn't be learned outside its cultural context. But Hatsumi recognized that cultural preservation sometimes requires cultural transformation, that survival matters more than purity. Other lineages took different approaches. The Genbukan, founded by Hatsumi's student Shoto Tanemura, emphasized systematic curriculum and standardized teaching methods. The Jinenkan, led by another Hatsumi student, Fumio Manaka, focused on maintaining technical precision and historical accuracy. These three major schools, along with several smaller organizations claiming ninja lineage, represent the surviving remnants of what was once a comprehensive system of unconventional warfare. The question of authenticity remains contentious and perhaps unanswerable. How much of what these schools teach represents genuine historical ninjutsu versus reconstruction, interpretation, or even innovation? The scrolls exist, the lineages are documented, though disputed, but the experiential knowledge, the practical application forged in life or death situations, disappeared generations ago. What survives is kata, technique practiced in controlled environments by people who will never test them in actual combat. Is this authentic preservation or elaborate historical reenactment? Modern military and law enforcement interest provides partial validation. Special operations forces from multiple nations have studied ninjutsu, finding applicable techniques for stealth, infiltration, and psychological operations. The principles, if not always the specific techniques, translate to contemporary contexts. The emphasis on adaptability, on understanding psychology, on exploiting enemy assumptions rather than confronting enemy strength, remains relevant regardless of technological changes. Popular culture ensured the ninja's immortality, though often at accuracy's expense. Films, comics, and video games created a global ninja mythology that bears minimal resemblance to historical reality, but generates enormous cultural influence. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles probably introduced more people to the concept than all historical scholarship combined. This pop culture ninja serves different purposes than historical accuracy. It provides entertainment, metaphor, power fantasy. Yet, it also sustains interest that occasionally leads people toward authentic study. The philosophical and spiritual aspects of ninjutsu may be what survives most authentically. The meditation techniques, the psychological training, the emphasis on adapting to circumstances rather than imposing will, these transcend specific martial techniques and remain applicable regardless of context. A modern practitioner may never need to infiltrate a castle or assassinate a warlord, but the mental disciplines developed through ninjutsu training offer value in contemporary life. Perhaps the truest legacy isn't specific techniques, but the concept itself, that intelligence and adaptability can overcome superior force. That understanding psychology provides advantages beyond physical capability, that unconventional approaches can achieve what conventional methods cannot. These principles influenced everything from World War II special operations to modern intelligence agencies. The ninja's philosophical legacy transcends their historical existence. The shadow warrior will never die because the idea is too powerful, too resonant with human needs and aspirations. We need to believe that the individual can matter against overwhelming odds, that skill and intelligence can triumph over brute force, that there are paths to power beyond conventional hierarchy. The ninja provides this mythology while being grounded in just enough reality to seem achievable. As the last generation trained by masters with direct connection to feudal-era practitioners ages and passes, authentic ninjutsu faces extinction as a living tradition. What survives will be reconstruction, interpretation, adaptation, valuable but different from unbroken transmission. Yet perhaps this too reflects ninja philosophy: adapt or die, and adaptation requires accepting that survival means transformation. The shadow warriors themselves would understand that sometimes, to endure, one must become something new while retaining essential elements of what one was. In that sense, their survival through change honors their deepest principles